Hello guys and welcome to episode 46 of the Beat Your Backlog Podcast, a podcast discussing the things gamers like to put off, get to another day, and oh yes, will definitely beat later, their backlog. I'm your host Adam and today we are entering the dark and scary Rifts of Hyrule in The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. The game was released on September 26, 2024, and it is the first new 2D or maybe top-down Zelda game in over 10 years. It was developed by Nintendo and Grezzo, the developers of the other 2D Zelda game of this generation, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, a remake of the 1993 Game Boy Classic. Like that game, Echoes of Wisdom uses the stunning, almost toy-like art direction to beautifully create the land of Hyrule, which, of course, we did not see in Link's Awakening because it was set on Koholint Island. Like with Link's Awakening, Echoes of Wisdom seems to have gone down well with critics, as it currently sits at an 86 on Metacritic. And the big change, of course, for this game is it is the first Zelda game ever where you actually play as, well, Zelda. And Zelda is not the little guy in green, that's Link, just so you know. So let's see how the shift of protagonist helps or hinders the newest title in the Zelda franchise in this week's episode of the Beat Your Backlog Podcast. But before we do, let me please remind you to follow, subscribe and review the podcast with 5 stars wherever you are listening. When you first start Echoes of Wisdom, it is a pretty familiar affair. So you start off as Link, the green-robed swordsman, with all of his heart containers full and all of the weapons he is renowned for. So you start with his sword, his bow and his bombs. And Link is of course on a mission to save Princess Zelda, who is being held captive in a purple crystal by the evil Ganon. And this form of Ganon looks like a big purple pig, which is really cool. After a pretty easy battle, Link is shocked to find that in fact the creature who he thought was Ganon is something much more sinister, after the kind of corpse of Ganon turns into a black shadow and begins to envelop everything around it. The blackness pulls Link inside, but before he gets swallowed whole, he manages to shoot an arrow at the crystal imprisoning Zelda, cracking it just enough for the princess to escape. Zelda breaks free and is a little bit too slow to save Link, but manages to escape the temple or the kind of ruin where she's been held just before the shadow manages to capture her too. And in an effort to save him, Zelda returns to Hyrule Castle to try and get help from her father, the king. She soon learns that the darkness, now known as a rift, has spread here too, capturing her father and his 2 advisors and replacing them with dark echoes of them. The imposters blame the appearance of the rift on Zelda and have her locked up in the castle dungeons. Whilst in prison, Zelda is visited by a fairy called Tree, or maybe Tri, I guess it's probably Tri. And Tri explains that the imposters now in charge of Hyrule are controlled by whatever monster is creating the rifts. Tri vows to help Zelda if she agrees to help get rid of the rifts. The two make a pact and Tri gives Zelda the Tri-Rod, which can be used to create echoes or copies of items in the world. Using the Tri-Rod to make an echo of a bed, Zelda escapes her prison and Hyrule Castle. Tri then gives her the mission of closing 2 massive rifts in the wider world of Hyrule, which are located in the southwest in the Gerudo Desert and in the northeast in Jabal Waters, which is where the Zora live. Without going into spoilers too much, it turns out closing these 2 rifts is not enough, as 3 new ones appear in other areas of Hyrule. Each rift is linked to a piece of prime energy, which is protected by one of the 3 goddesses of Hyrule's past. You may not be surprised to find that the 3 pieces of the prime energy are used to create the Triforce, but it's not called the Triforce in this game, it just looks like the Triforce. And Zelda must collect the prime energy and close the rifts quickly before the creature of darkness, who is creating the rifts, who is now called Null, manages to get the prime energy before her. The journey takes Zelda across the whole of Hyrule and has her meeting all of the peoples of the land. In addition, it also has her finding Link's sword, which gives her the brief period of channeling his power and skills to use in battle. And yeah, if you've not seen the game, obviously the big difference is that you get to play as Zelda, and also the big selling point of the game is that as switching to Zelda, you also have a new mechanic called the Echo mechanic. And what the Echo mechanic is that you can use the Tri-Rod and can select certain items in the world to learn their echoes. And usually the items are surrounded by these little triangles because, it's a Zelda game, so triangles and the number 3 is very important throughout the entire story, hence why the fairy is called Tri. And you can copy these echoes or these items by pressing, I think it's ZR. And then that kind of adds them to your Echo library, which you can use via the D-pad to kind of scroll through, almost like you could with in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. You can scroll through it and select the Echo at any time, and then you can then cast it with ZR as well. So then you can, once you have it in your library, you can use it at any time you want. And the purpose of these echoes is that you can then use them whenever you like to solve puzzles or help you out in battle. So it's not just items, but also creatures and enemies. Once you beat them in battle, you can then learn their echo. The only thing that you're really limited by is the level that Tri has, because behind it has like a little trail of triangles again, which is sort of the currency or the mana that Tri needs to use to spawn in echoes. So for example, like you might have a pot echo which costs 1 triangle, and Tri starts off the game with 3 triangles, so it means at any one time you can spawn in 3 pots. But what's cool is that it doesn't just stop, like say, okay, once you get to 3, you can't spawn anything else in. You can keep using the rod, and it will spawn in a new pot and just remove the oldest pot that you spawn. So if you spawned in 3, you can spawn in a new one, but the first one that you spawn will then disappear and a new one will spawn, which is really cool. And it's really interesting, like how many echoes are in this game. Like there are a staggering amount of echoes to learn, and when I started the game I thought this was like one of the coolest mechanics I'd ever seen, because it really just has I thought it had very almost endless possibilities that this could open up, that you can create these echoes and use them at any point in the game. And this was especially so when I first used a ladder of beds to see if I could jump over a tree line on the very first route you enter when you escape Hyrule Castle. So if you've played any kind of 2D top-down game, especially, like if you think of like Link's A Link to the Past, or maybe even like a Pokemon game, there are always usually trees at the side of lanes or routes that kind of go off screen, that okay, these are borders that are basically funneling me towards wherever I need to go. And this game has that too, but I was like, well, I know I can use 3 beds and I can stack them on top of each other, so could I use those 3 beds to jump over these trees? And I was almost expecting it to let me jump on a tree but then hit an invisible wall, but it didn't. It just let me jump literally on top of the trees. I could run around the trees, and then when I ran to the right, there was like an opening, like a meadow in the middle of the trees with a cave in it, and I went in the cave and then found a chest there that had some rupees in it. And it just felt so kind of like freeing to be like, okay, the game has very set rules in like that. Okay, you can spawn this many echoes, and you can spawn echoes whenever you want, and you can use those rules. With those rules, you can be like, well, I should be allowed to do this. And in a lot of games, sometimes they have rules and you think you should be able to do something, but it's like, nah, actually, because it's a video game, you can't do that. But when that first happened, that first realization of like, if I think it and it works within the game rules, then it actually happens. It just felt so like, oh my god, like this game is going to be. I really thought this game was going to be my game of the year when this first like click of like, oh my god, I can't believe this actually worked. And in hindsight, I guess I maybe should have expected that to work, because if anyone's played Tears of the Kingdom, you'll also know that that game also gives players a very set rule set, and lets them experiment and get creative with all of the kind of the mechanics that they have to almost bend the rules. And that's exactly how this game feels at the start, is that you feel like, I'm bending the rules, I'm breaking the game, because so early on I managed to get 50 rupees by jumping over a tree that in any other 2D top-down game I'd never ever be able to do. And this kind of buzz of realization in that, like I said, really made me think that this game was going to be my game of the year, and that it's like a Zelda game that kind of gives you endless opportunities to play it and beat it. And however, after a few more hours of playing the game, I actually came crashing down quite hard on it. So getting more into the echoes, there are lots and lots of echoes, but I must say, like after a while, you do realize which ones are the better ones. And I would say that throughout the game, there was probably about 10 that I used mostly to solve every single combat problem or puzzle problem I had. And again, it kind of reminds me of Tears of the Kingdom in that respect, because if you follow the Tears of the Kingdom subreddit, at least when the game released, people were creating these amazing machines, like flying machines. Like I saw one person made like an X-Wing from Star Wars in it, and they were making these very creative ways to solve problems within the game. But I also saw people that had those same problems in the game basically use very, I would say, maybe logical or functional means to solve the same problem. So instead of investing hours building an X-Wing to fly over a canyon, they would instead just go chop down 10 trees, glue all of the trees together, throw it over the canyon, and then walk across. And that's kind of how the ecosystem works in this game, is that there are lots and lots of options to be creative in solving issues in the game, but the fastest and the most obvious ones that to use revolve around the same 10 echoes. And I think it's probably about 90% of the obstacles I came across in the game were solved either by making a ladder out of beds or using a trampoline to get over ledges, because the game does have quite a lot of elevation to it. That's sort of how it gates you off in some areas, is that there might be a tall cliff that you can't get up because you can't spawn in enough beds or enough trampolines to get up there. But yeah, there were very few times where I actually had to get really creative to solve an issue out in the world when exploring, or when this tried and true method of just make a ladder out of beds never ever worked. And at the start of the game, yeah, there were some like obstacles, or not even at the start, I suppose, but there were points in the game where you would go into an area and be like, okay, I can see there is something I need to work out here. So which might, at first have had me scratching my head. Like for one example, in the kind of volcanic area of Hyrule, there is a lot of lava everywhere, and there are these like air ducts that kind of look like they call it geysers, spurt out like big plumes of air or water. They look like that. And I was looking at the layout of the map in front of me, like, okay, these guys I know that they blow me up into the air, and I know I need to get across the lava. So I'm like, so there's something I'm missing that means I can then kind of use a direction to, once I'm in the air, to blow me over the lava. And just as I was kind of thinking, okay, well, what echoes do I have? What could I possibly try? Do I have something that I can spawn in water to prevent the lava from burning me? Is there something like do I have some kind of smoothie? Like smoothies are kind of like potions in the game that gives me like an effect against burning that I can then use to get across the lava. But literally, as my brain just started to ticking and thinking it through, there was a monster, it looked like a Goomba with wings, kind of flapped into view. And I thought, okay, well, I've never seen this monster before. I've only ever seen it here. This is the first time I've ever seen it. So obviously this monster is what I need to solve this puzzle. Or to solve this obstacle, I should say. So then it just became, okay, how can I kill the monster? Which you can do in a number of ways, but mostly it was using one of the, I can't remember their name, like the goblin guys that throw spears to kill it, and then I could copy its echo, and then I stood on the guys on the air duct, and then held the new monster above my head, and once I was in the air, the monster blew out a plume of air, which then shot me across the lava, and I'd solved the problem. And yeah, it was just very, there's like, in a lot of modern game design, especially AAA game design, there is this sense of, okay, here is a problem, and right away, here is the solution. And that's exactly how the game felt a lot in this game. It's like, okay, here is a new problem that you have to solve. You have to work out how to get up to this ledge. Okay, as soon as you start to think about it, here is the solution. And people talk about God of War and Horizon with the like the NPCs being like, oh, this is, as soon as you see the problem, they tell you the answer. And in this game, it was more, as soon as you see the problem, the answer appears in front of you with, this is the creature or the echo that you need to solve it, which was a little bit of a shame. And yeah, so like I said, at the very start of the game, I thought, oh my god, this is going to be so cool. Like, it's going to be one of those games where you have conversations with people like, how did you solve this puzzle? Like, I did it like this, and how did you do it? Or, well, I used this other method. Kind of how Breath of the Wild was when it released back in 2017. But it really just became, like I said, most of the puzzles were just solved with me either using beds to make a ladder and then a trampoline to get over a ledge, or using the same kind of well, not enemies, but enemies that I had echoes of to fight enemies, which was a big shame. And I think as well, another shame was playing as Zelda, and not in the kind of misogynistic way of, I don't want to play as a woman, but as in, I think Zelda was kind of done a little bit dirty in this game, because I'm a Zelda fan. I'm a fan of the series, and I'm also a fan of the character Zelda, and I've wanted to play as her in a game for a while, and I was actually convinced that we were going to be playing as Zelda in Tears of the Kingdom. And I felt actually it was a little bit underwhelming when it was announced or shown that we would be still playing as Link. Therefore, I was really excited that they announced that Zelda would be the playable character in Echoes of Wisdom. But after starting the game, the excitement died pretty quickly because of the combat of the game. And though it seems that the roles have been switched and that actually in this game Link is the damsel in distress and not Zelda, I think unfortunately that's not the case, because Zelda just isn't really like a compelling or interesting character. Like, she doesn't, especially in combat, she doesn't even have her own attacks. All she can do in combat is use echoes or use Link's sword. So this basically turns the combat into almost like a tower defense game, where you're just spawning in creatures to fight off enemies, and if the creature dies, you just spawn in another one straight away, and it just becomes like, okay, making sure that you spawn in enough so that the enemies can't get close to you, and just doing that until the enemy is wiped out. Or maybe sometimes you might be like, okay, I have to avoid the enemy, so you'll spawn in, like, I'm going to put a video up on Blue Sky. What I was doing was, at the end of the game, I had 6 triangles, and the goblin characters, they cost 1 each for the spearmen. So I would just spawn in 6 spearmen, just go stand at the opposite end of the room from wherever they were fighting, and just wait for them to kill whatever I needed to kill. And this just became my sort of strategy for every fight. And as soon as one of them died, I'd just spawn in another one, and then just wait until they managed to kill whatever I needed them to kill. And you can, like I said, do some melee damage via, I think it's called a hero sword, but it's basically Link's sword, which you find early on in the game. And this strangely lets you turn into like a ghost version of Link, and you can use his abilities and attributes for a short time. So basically you can use his sword, you can use his bow, and you can use his bomb. And if you've played any 2D Zelda game before, it works exactly like how Link plays. So you tap Y to swing your sword, you hold it down, and he does like a 360 spin. X fires his bow, and A spawns a bomb, and then you press A again to throw it. And I just thought it was such a weird thing to really go out on a limb to be like, all right, this is a game where you play as Zelda, but to actually do damage in the game, you actually turn back into Link. And I was like, why not just give Zelda her own weapons? Like, when you look online, there are some really cool like fan artworks of like Zelda warrior princesses where she's, I don't know, or like in other Zelda games, there was Sheik where she was kind of like an assassin, right? And in this fan art, it's her in like armor and carrying a huge sword, and I was like, why couldn't we just play as that Zelda? Like, it maybe it makes sense that the designers wanted us to use the echoes more often, but I still think instead of giving her Link's sword, they could have just given her some weapons that maybe weren't like, they didn't want to make her too overpowered. That's why Link's sword is like, there's a time limit on it. But I'm like, well, instead of giving her a sword, why not give her a dagger that, visually you can see it doesn't do as much damage as a sword would. Or instead of a bow, give her like a boomerang or a slingshot, like just something that makes her feel more unique and more like her. Rather than just, okay, she has to turn into Link to be good, because otherwise she's just like some damsel basically. And I just thought, and it was just a really weird design decision. And also, like, giving her even weaker weapons would get rid of the mechanic of using like a timed weapon, which was also annoying, because I felt like the game just didn't give you enough of the currency to use the timed sword weapon. So again, most of the time you were just stood in a corner of a room spawning in creatures to kill enemies, which was weird. And I think what's also very weird about the game is, especially since we're talking about Zelda, is that she is also a silent protagonist in Echoes of Wisdom, which is the trope of Zelda in general, of the franchise, that Link is the silent protagonist, he never says anything. But I'm pretty sure that in every single other Zelda game in the series, Zelda always talks, or always has, maybe not talks, but she has dialogue, right? Because none of the games are voice acted apart from the 2 new ones. So I'm like, why didn't she talk in this game? Like, it's just so strange of like, basically they just made Zelda into Link, but arguably made her a worse version of Link because she has no attack. She only uses echoes, and the echo system in combat just isn't great. And and it's also weird that like everything goes through Tri. So Tri basically is narrating the story to you and acts as Zelda's voice. But in the story, it's also like saying Tri is saying to Zelda, like, "Oh, Zelda, tell them this." And I'm like, why not just have Zelda just say that? It just felt so strange that this character that we know can talk and does talk and has talked in all of the other Zelda games didn't talk in this game, a game that is about her. It just felt so weird. So yeah, I don't know what they were really thinking. Like, it does make playing as Zelda feel like a gimmick of like, oh, we should make people play as Zelda because people want to play as female protagonists now, and it's seen as progressive. But in my opinion, I don't think it's very progressive because they don't make Zelda herself a cool character to play as. They just make her a character that is female, which is, yeah, I don't think the best way to go. But anyway, getting back to the combat. So like I said, a lot of the time you're just spawning in a lot of creatures to try and get them to beat whatever enemies they're up against. And the problem with this is that the AI of the echo creatures is not that good, especially the ranged ones. So the ranged echoes, their accuracy is very, very bad, especially if you're trying to use them against flying enemies, which is arguably the time that you do use ranged creatures, because you can't get to them with melee, so you have to use the ranged one. So again, a lot of the time it's just like you're just spawning in creatures in the hopes that one of them will eventually hit whatever you need it to hit to kill it, and that you can move on, and you're just kind of stood there watching and waiting, which is, yeah, again, just does not feel very good in a Zelda game. And the other problem is that if you do get some cool, like, there is kind of like I can't remember their names, but you know, like the lizard enemies in the Zelda franchise, you get one of them and he's got this like really cool gold armor. He has this huge, but not pitchfork, like a trident. And I'm like, cool, I have this guy. This guy's going to be really good, which he was most of the time. But like I said before, a lot of the terrain has elevation to it, because they want to use the elevation to kind of limit where you can go. But if you have enemies on elevation, the AI of the melee echoes is not very good, so they can't work out how am I supposed to jump up there and hit this enemy. Or it might be that the enemy is right on the very edge of the ledge, so your guy will jump up there, get hit, fall back down, and then jump up there, get hit again, and then eventually die. So then you have to be like, okay, well, now I'll build a ladder of beds so my creature can get up there and get behind it and hit it. Where I'm like, okay, if you'd just given Zelda a slingshot, I could have just slingshot him and killed him and moved on, instead of having to sit here for 2 minutes working out how do I kill this annoying enemy on top of a ledge. And this kind of all of this comes to a head in the very final battle of the game, the final boss battle, which is one of the worst final battles I think I've ever experienced. To win, what you need to do is you need to destroy these red orbs that are kind of on like spidery, like octopus-like monster legs. And the monster more or less rotates in a circle. So it rotates 360 degrees, it keeps rotating, and there are these red eyes on the end of its legs that you have to hit. That sounds easy in a regular Zelda game, you know, you just jump over the legs, hit them, and job's a good one. But in this final fight, you can only use the echoes, so you can't use Link's sword anymore. And you can't turn into Link. So basically, you can only use your echoes to hit these very small moving red balls. And because it's a Zelda game, you have to basically rinse and repeat this process 3 times, because every Zelda boss you have to do the same thing 3 times in, or a variation of the same thing 3 times, because again, 3 is a big thing in the Zelda franchise, right? So the entire fight, I basically spent huddled in the corner, hoping not to get hit, whilst I watched my Echoes do their best to hit a very specific area of the boss that needed hitting when the boss was moving. So again, this just really baffled me that they decided to do this as the final boss, like basically give you all of the worst aspects of the game and be like, okay, this is how we're ending the game. And if you ask me, for a game that takes about 20 hours to beat, it's not the best way to finish it. And anyway, so yeah, the combat is weird. The ecosystem is not very good in the combat, and I think Zelda is very underwhelming. But what I also thought was quite interesting in this game, and what I'm noticing about the Zelda franchise, is like all of the other Zelda games since Breath of the Wild, Echo of Wisdom uses a lot of like the UI, the font, the menus, and the sound effects from that game. And I think this is now like the 5th game on the Switch that's done this. So the first one was Breath of the Wild. Then there was obviously Tears of the Kingdom, Link's Awakening, Echoes of Wisdom, and there was the Hyrule Warriors game that was based kind of on Breath of the Wild. So this is like the 5th time in 7 years now that we've seen this happen. And it's kind of like a weird thing because this, especially with this game, because it also uses the art style of Link's Awakening. So those games look pretty much exactly the same, even though we'll go on to a little bit more about the art style in this game. But I'm starting to worry that like Zelda games might be falling into the same kind of cookie cutter like template and structure as 2D Mario games did for the last like 15 years, where every 2D Mario game more or less looked and sounded the same. Like obviously the levels and some of the mechanics were different, but everything was so uniform and so the same. It became so like sterile and boring looking, and I'm really worried that Zelda might be falling into that too. That basically going forward, all 3D Zelda games look like Breath of the Wild and sound like Breath of the Wild, and all 2D Zelda games look like Link's Awakening and sound like Breath of the Wild, basically. And I think it's just weird because Zelda as a franchise is famous for every game looking and feeling unique. Like if you think about the GameCube era and how different Twilight Princess looks compared to Wind Waker, and I know Twilight Princess was kind of a reaction to Wind Waker, how Wind Waker looked, but how it can go from such like kind of cel-shaded cartoon style to more like a more realistic and grungy style. I think it's that to me is the Zelda franchise, that every game can feel so different. I guess you could also maybe argue with Final Fantasy, but their visual styles don't really vary in Final Fantasy from game to game. I would say they always look very realistic, but Zelda, it was always like, okay, completely new art style, completely new story. They're all kind of linked somehow via the story, but it's not like, sequels, or I guess some of them are sequels, but you know what I mean, like they don't all lead into one another. So I hope going forward that they kind of, at least with the Switch 2, maybe they have a new style where it's like, okay, the new 3D game looks different. It doesn't look like another version of Breath of the Wild, and the new 2D games don't look like another version of Link's Awakening. And yeah, I mean, I've been so far quite negative on the game, but of course it's not all bad. It's a Zelda game at the end of the game, so the game does a lot of things very, very well. Other than Zelda herself being underwhelming, I do really like the story in the game. I think it's a pretty good Zelda story, because it's cool to have a new antagonist that is not Ganon or Ganondorf, even though we do see Ganon briefly at the start of the game. Plus, I think the myth and the lore behind Null and the three goddesses is like a remixed take on a standard Zelda formula, because we've seen the goddesses in Zelda multiple times, and again the Triforce and its prime energy is something that we've seen before, but it's just interesting. It's just an interesting take on it, and it has this interesting sort of bad guy, and has an interesting like history to Hyrule, which I enjoyed. In addition, I like the sidekick of Tri 2. I think when you compare it to, I don't know if it's a he or a she, but you compare it to other sidekicks, like I preferred what was she? It was Impa from Twilight Princess. I think they were way more interesting, but obviously that's a much longer game, so maybe we can't compare those two. But I did like Tri, and I liked that it had like a level to it. So what you would do is you could go into, there are the main like 5 or 6 rifts that you have to go in to progress the story, but there are also smaller rifts dotted around the world, kind of like shrines in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that you can just go into, and they're like really quick, and you go into them, find these like nodes of darkness that you have to destroy, and then once you destroy them, you close a rift, and then Tri gets like a level up. And I thought this looks cool. because I wanted to try to level up, because if you level it up, it makes echoes cheaper and also gives her more triangles, so you can spawn more echoes, which is cool. But then by the end of the game, I actually realized that I think Tri would always level up to its max level. It doesn't even matter if you did the side rifts or not. So that did feel a bit like of a waste of time doing them, because I was only doing them to level it up. But yeah, at the end of the game, it seems like you do that anyway. But as a character, I think it's kind of interesting. And again, the story is interesting, that she's kind of like this little fairy that looks like almost like a jingle bell or whatever. Is it a jingle bell? Yeah, jingle bell, I guess is what it's called. Like this small, like little golden bell looking thing. And that it has the power to kind of cleanse this darkness and close the rifts. Furthermore, the kind of little side stories in the game were great, or the subplots, I guess I would call them, not really side stories. And they had some really memorable characters. They all feel really, really wholesome. I don't know if it's the art style that did it, but the stories themselves are very kind of touching, and you instantly like all of the characters in the game. One of them that stands out is the one with the Goron chief. So he's a new Goron chief called Darson, and basically he's just taken over as chief after his father's death, and he's trying to like find his own way and step out from his father's shadow, which is really interesting to see. There's also the story with the Zora, where there are two different Zora leaders who are bickering with each other about whose music is better, which is kind of cool and funny. And then there's like a really touching story of a character called Konde, who is a snow yeti, and about them waiting for their brother. And all of this is entwined in the main story, so you don't have to go off the beaten track really to look for it. But it's just really nice that it kind of elevates the story. The story isn't always this high level good versus evil. There are also these smaller, more touching stories for each of the regions of Hyrule, which is nice. And finally, I love the stamp man. So there is a stamp guy who parachutes in every time you find like a little like tourist stamp that you can stamp for unlocking new areas of Hyrule. And he does a stamp rally where you have to collect, I think it's like 4 or 5 stamps. And if you do, he then appears with his parachute and gives you a prize. The prizes are always a little bit meh, but I always look forward to seeing him when I filled up my stamp card, because he's very positive, and his positivity is very contagious. And it was just nice, yeah, like I said, that even though there is like this very Zelda high level story of good versus evil, that it was entwined with these smaller, charming stories that just made the game itself feel even more charming. Getting on to the main thing of a Zelda game, or it used to be the main thing, is the dungeons. And how the dungeons work in this game is that the 5 or 6 bigger rifts that you have to do for the story are the dungeons. You have to close them to progress the story. And I think, yeah, they're all really well designed and had the right mix of kind of guidance and challenge that you would want in a Zelda game. So it's usually like you go in to one of the rifts, you find like the main, when you get into a rift, it's kind of like an abstract world where parts of Hyrule have been sucked in and are kind of placed all over the place. So there's like a lot of gaps between roads or whatever that you have to kind of jump over. And then you would get to some temple, and usually within the temple, that's where the dungeon would be. And it did the typical Zelda thing of, within the first 4 or 5 rooms, you find the treasure map, or the map, I should say, and then the map you can use to then find your way around the dungeon. And they were always done over multiple floors, and you had to find keys to unlock doors, and eventually find the boss key to unlock the boss door, and then fight the boss. And I think, yeah, the puzzles were pretty good. And when I'm talking about puzzles, what I mean is like not the kind of challenges you had to do in the overworld using the same 10 echoes, but actual really like human design puzzles where there was like a solution that you had to find out. And usually these solutions revolve around using Tri to move blocks or parts of the environment to trigger switches. So what you could do is, by pressing X, you would shoot Tri out, and he or it would possess an inanimate object, which then, if you move Zelda, would move the object around. And you could also like lock Zelda, so if the object itself was moving and you possessed it and then locked yourself, you would then move with the object as well. So there were some instances where there might be a gap, and above you a moving platform, and you could shoot Tri. We're saying right, yeah, Tri. You can shoot Tri to hit the platform and then lock it, so that then it would act as like a little moving sort of. Basically, you're attached to it, so that it would carry you across the gap, and then you could let go, and you'd be at the other platform, which was cool. Yeah, again, there were some times where you entered the room and were kind of like scratching your head a little bit, but this was mostly because I forgot that you could use try to solve puzzles. So once I kind of hammered it into my head that, okay, try is a means to solve a puzzle, the puzzles weren't that challenging. They were, I would say, thought-provoking. Like, it's kind of like you had to think about it, and then once it clicked, you're like, okay, I know what I have to do. But this was nice because the puzzles weren't necessarily spoiled like some of the kind of obstacles were that we talked about before. The one thing I wasn't the biggest fan of in some of the dungeons was there are stealth areas. So I don't know, again, what it is with developers recently who think like women characters also always have to be stealthy. Like, especially I'm looking at Insomniac here with the Mary Jane sections of the latest Spider-Man games, I should say. But there are sections where Zelda has to sneak through areas without being seen by guards. And if she is seen, basically the guard charges you down. You can't run away, you can't get away, you are caught, and then you have to restart the area. And yeah, these areas were just sort of like a nuisance and kind of felt a bit pointless because it was just wait until guard turns around and then move, or platform up above all of the guards and walk across the room there. And it kind of makes sense at the start, at the very first encounter, because you're escaping prison, so obviously you don't want to be seen. But the ones after that just became so annoying. And kind of getting back to the positivity, or trying to, I know I complained a little bit before about the game reusing the assets and style of Link's Awakening, but I do think the art in this game is absolutely gorgeous. I think it looks even more polished and better than Link's Awakening. I really like the effect that they have where Zelda, the camera is always kind of focused on Zelda, but just around the edges of the focus, it blurs slightly, so it really hones you in on Zelda. And I think it really, really works well with like the very simplified, like kind of toyish, almost like clay kind of crafting sort of material look the world has. The whole world looks like a diorama basically, and it's just so bright and colourful. It has really nice particle effects. It just gives the world like sort of depth. Also, the lighting looks really, really nice in this game. And again, you wouldn't think lighting would be so important on a world that looks so stylized to look like kind of little toys, but it's just beautiful, like just the golden lighting. Also in the game, there is a lot of water areas, which I don't really remember in Link's Awakening. Like, I remember that you wash up on a beach in Link's Awakening, but that's about it. Whereas in this game, you're in Hyrule and there's like a big lake that you go to. A lot of the puzzles or a lot of the dungeons have water aspects to them as well. And again, the water just looks so, like, not realistic, but it just looks so good in this world. Like, it just makes everything feel vibrant and pretty. And yeah, it's a very, very beautiful game. And if you for whatever reason you haven't seen any screenshots or gameplay of the game, definitely go and check it out because it is a beautiful game. And in addition, again, this is like a top tier sounding game, I would say. So we talked again about some of the sound effects being used from Breath of the Wild, and there are also the sound effects that we've heard a million times in Zelda games of like the chest opening, the kind of sword, the 360 spin of Link, his kind of the shout he does when when he does that. Everything that you expect is in here, but then when you listen to the music is just, yeah, again, like very like top tier Nintendo, I would say. Earlier this year, I reviewed Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door, and I would say that that's like a B tier Nintendo soundtrack, where it's good, like the music is great, but you could tell that maybe because it was a remaster or a remake, they were like, okay, we don't need to put the A-team on this, we can just recreate the tracks that we have with someone else. But this is like, this is like top level orchestra. Zelda has all of the tunes you expect, has new ones that sound fantastic. I always think in Zelda games, the best music is always at the start of the game when you're around Hyrule or Hyrule Field, which is, I think, the case in this game too. But the quality of the game just continues, the quality of this music continues all the way to the end. It's a fantastic sounding game, and a game that I hope they add, or if they haven't done so already, add to the new Nintendo Music app. So after going through everything, the story, Zelda herself, the dungeons, the art style, the music, the question still remains: should you play The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom? And I never thought I'd say this for a Zelda game, but no, I don't think you need to play this game. Firstly, remember it is a 2D Zelda game, so you should not compare it to Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. But even still, as a 2D Zelda game, I think Echoes of Wisdom is good, but not great. The ecosystem is compelling at first, but soon becomes a foregone conclusion because most of the challenges the game throws at you can be solved with the same 10 echoes. The gimmick of playing as Zelda had me excited at the start of the game, but Nintendo did not do anything to make Zelda feel special or different from Link. If anything, they made her feel like a worse version of him. This is because the combat feels more like a tower defense game rather than an action-adventure game, and because Zelda has no melee moves other than transforming into Link for a short period of time, and can only summon echoes of creatures she's encountered to fight for her. This results in hiding in a corner whilst your creatures do the fighting for you. However, when the final battle of the game revolves around these wonky AI-controlled creatures having to hit specific points on the final boss, it makes the last section of the game feel infuriating. The game has a great story with some charming characters and it looks and sounds fantastic, but there are many other games in the series that do this too. Therefore, I would suggest any other Zelda game over Echoes of Wisdom. If you've already played the other games in the series, then wait for a decent sale before picking this one up or try and buy it second hand. And yeah, guys, that's my conclusion. I don't think you need to play this game. So like if you've maybe been waiting for Black Friday to pick it up, I would really suggest like wait for a big sale. Like I know Nintendo never really do that, or maybe try and pick up the game second hand, because then you'll get it, you know, if you get it for around like $40, I think then it's probably worth it. But there is, you know, if you're like a newer Zelda player and you haven't played some of the previous ones, I think it's probably better going back and trying to find like, you know, a Link's Awakening, I think is better than this game. I think like if you play not A Link to the Past, A Link Between Worlds is definitely better than this game. So if you have a 3DS, try and play the games on there first before getting this one. But yeah, I'm really interested to see what you guys think, if you have played it or if you plan to play it. And if you have played it, you can let me know what you thought of the game yourself. Did you enjoy playing as Zelda? Did you think that Nintendo did her justice? What did you think of the ecosystem? What did you think of the combat? If you're a Spotify listener, you can let me know by commenting on the episode down below in the description. So Spotify now has a comment section. So if you want to leave a comment about this or about anything else, please make sure you do. And if you're listening elsewhere, you can let me know on social media by hitting me up on Blue Sky, and it's bybpodcast.bsky.social on Blue Sky, or just search for Beat Your Backlog Podcast on Blue Sky, because the search functionality there is really good, not like Twitter. Or if you're on Instagram, you can message me there at byb_podcast, or the best way to actually message or have a conversation, I would say, is in Discord. And the link to our Discord is in the description. And before you go, if you're listening, or if you're in the mood, I should say, to listen to more content about The Legend of Zelda, make sure you check out episode 26 about Twilight Princess, or episode 14 about my time with Tears of the Kingdom. And just before you leave, for the second time, like a PSS or PPP, how do you say it? PSS? PPS? Anyway, before you go, just remember that Beat Your Backlog is a new podcast and needs your support. If you've enjoyed the episode, please consider subscribing and or following wherever you're listening, and leaving us a 5-star review, because 5-star reviews help new people find the podcast. Again, guys, thanks so much for listening. Have a great day. Bye bye.